Everyone ignored the confused old man on the street. But when a 12-year-old newspaper boy stopped to help, he had no idea the man in the suit watching from afar was about to change his life forever. The alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m. Marcus's hand shot out from under the thin blanket, fingers fumbling in the dark until they found the phone. He sat up, shoulders tight from yesterday's paper route. His worn yellow sweatshirt hung on the chair beside his bed, waiting for another morning delivery run. "Marcus!" His mother's voice carried from the kitchen. "You up, baby?" "Yeah, Mom, I'm up." He pulled the sweatshirt over his head, the fabric soft and familiar against his skin. His feet found the cold floor, and he made his way to the bathroom, careful not to let the floorboards creak too much. The bathroom mirror showed his tired face in the harsh fluorescent light. Dark circles hung under his eyes, and his curly hair needed a trim. He splashed cold water on his face, the shock helping to chase away the last bits of sleep. In the kitchen, his mother stood at the counter, one hand pressed against her lower back. She wore her diner uniform, the blue polyester reflecting the dim light from above the stove. "Mom, you should be resting." Marcus grabbed the medicine bottle from the top shelf and shook out 2 pills. "Doctor said you need to take it easy." She accepted the pills with a WAN smile. "Bills don't pay themselves, baby. And someone's got to keep food on the table. I can pick up more work. Mr. Johnson at the corner store said he might need help stocking shelves. You focus on school." She swallowed the pills with a sip of water. "Your education comes first." Marcus pulled 2 eggs from the refrigerator and cracked them into a pan. The sizzle filled the small kitchen as he worked, his movements efficient from months of morning routines. He'd learned to cook eggs 6 different ways by watching YouTube videos, determined to help his mother have a proper breakfast before her shifts. "Scrambled today?" he asked, already reaching for the spatula. "Just 1 egg for me. Save the other for yourself." "Already got mine cooking." He hadn't, but she didn't need to know that. The kitchen radio played softly in the background, morning news mixing with the sounds of breakfast preparation. Marcus caught snippets about local weather, traffic, and community events. None of it meant much to him, but the background noise helped fill the silence that sometimes stretched between him and his mother. "Mrs. Peterson called yesterday," his mother said, settling into a kitchen chair with a slight wince. "Said you did a good job cleaning her gutters." "Yeah, paid me $20. Marcus slid the eggs onto a plate and placed it in front of her. "I put it in the jar." The jar sat on top of the refrigerator, a former pickle container now holding their emergency fund. Marcus had started it 3 months ago when his mother first hurt her back. The label read "House Money" in his careful handwriting. "You're 12, Marcus. You shouldn't have to worry about these things." "I'm almost 13. He wiped down the counter, avoiding her eyes. "And I want to help." The morning continued its familiar rhythm. Marcus packed his mother's lunch while she ate, making sure to include the painkillers she'd need later. He'd labeled the pill container with times, knowing her pride would keep her from asking co-workers for help remembering when to take them. At 5:15 a.m., Marcus shouldered his delivery bag. The newspapers waited in bundles on their front step, dropped off by the distribution truck while they'd been getting ready. He counted them quickly, 53 houses today. "Be careful out there," his mother called from the doorway. "And Marcus, I love you, baby." "Love you too, Mom." The street lay quiet and dark before him. Streetlights cast pools of yellow light on the sidewalk, and the air held that special stillness that came before dawn. Marcus began his route, muscle memory guiding his feet along the familiar path. Mrs. Henderson's house came first. She laid her paper on the top step, not the bottom. Marcus climbed the stairs quietly, placed the paper, and moved on. 20 steps to Mr. Garcia's house. Paper in the mailbox, not on the porch. Another 30 steps to the Williams residence. The rhythm of delivery helped him plan his day. School at 8 a.m. Math test in second period. He'd studied during lunch breaks last week, working problems between bites of sandwich. After school, he needed to check on Mrs. Peterson, see if she had any more odd jobs. The grocery store near his house sometimes needed help bagging in the afternoons. A car turned onto the street, headlights sweeping across him. Marcus tensed, remembering Mr. Crawford's accusation last month. The old man had seen him delivering papers and called the police, claiming Marcus was casing houses for burglary. It had taken his mother coming outside in her uniform, explaining that Marcus was a registered paper carrier, to settle things down. The car passed without slowing. Marcus let out his breath and continued working. Dawn began to break as he reached the halfway point of his route. The sky lightened from black to deep blue, then to the soft gray of early morning. Birds started their morning songs, and early risers' kitchen lights clicked on in house after house. At the corner of Maple and Pine, Marcus encountered Mr. Thompson's son in his usual dark suit, leaving for work early as always. The man barely glanced at Marcus as he climbed into his expensive car. Marcus delivered the paper to his house anyway. Mr. Thompson was on his route, even if his son never seemed to notice the boy's existence. The rest of the route passed quickly. Marcus developed this pattern months ago. Alternate between houses on opposite sides of the street to minimize crossing. Fold papers before starting to save time. Remember each customer's specific requests. Some wanted the paper in plastic bags on rainy days. Others needed it placed just so, at exact spots on their property. By 6:30 a.m., Marcus had finished his deliveries. His shoulders ached from the weight of the bag, and his fingers were smudged with newsprint. He had enough time to return home, shower, and get ready for school. The house was empty when he got back, his mother already gone to her first shift at the diner. A note sat on the kitchen counter. Lunch money in the drawer. Study hard. Love you. Marcus showered quickly, changed into school clothes, and packed his backpack. The math textbook weighed heavy against his already sore shoulders, but he couldn't leave it behind. Not with the test today. The walk to school took 20 minutes. Other kids began appearing on the sidewalks as he got closer to Marshall Middle School, many of them driven by parents in SUVs and minivans. Marcus kept his head down, focused on reviewing math formulas in his mind. "Hey, paper boy!" The shout came from behind him. Marcus didn't turn around. He recognized Tommy Peterson's voice, and nothing good ever came from engaging with him. "I said hey, you deaf or something?" Marcus walked faster, his hand tightening on his backpack strap. The school building lay just ahead, its brick walls promising safety if he could just make it inside. "My dad says you're probably stealing from the houses on your route." Tommy's voice carried across the schoolyard. "Says nobody trusts her." The bell rang, cutting off whatever Tommy had been about to say. Marcus pushed through the front doors, letting the noise and chaos of the morning rush surround him. He made his way to his locker, exchanged his backpack for his first period books, and headed to class. Ms. Rodriguez, his math teacher, stood at the door greeting students. She smiled when she saw Marcus. "Ready for the test?" "Yes." He managed a small smile in return. "Been studying hard." "I know you have. You'll do fine." The classroom filled quickly. Marcus took his usual seat near the back, away from Tommy and his friends. He pulled out his pencils, calculator, and scratch paper, arranging them neatly on his desk. The familiar routine helped calm his nerves. As Ms. Rodriguez began distributing test papers, Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He could do this. He had to do this. Good grades meant scholarships later, and scholarships meant college, and college meant a better life for him and his mom. The test paper landed on his desk. Marcus opened his eyes, picked up his pencil, and began to work. Hours later, as the afternoon sun slanted through classroom windows, Marcus packed up his books. The test had gone well. He was sure he'd scored at least a B+, maybe even an A-. Ms. Rodriguez had smiled when he handed it in, and she usually had a good sense about these things. Now came the harder part of his day. He needed to check the job board at the corner store, see if anyone needed yard work or odd jobs done. His mother's back wasn't getting better as quickly as the doctors had hoped, and the medical bills kept coming. As Marcus stepped out of the school building, he didn't know that tomorrow would change everything. He couldn't have guessed that his decision to help a confused old man would transform not just his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. For now, he was just a 12-year-old boy with too many responsibilities, walking home under a gradually darkening sky, planning his next move in the endless game of staying ahead of bills and worry. The sun began to set as he walked, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Tomorrow waited just around the corner, bringing with it a choice that would test everything Marcus had learned about trust, kindness, and the courage to do what's right, even when the whole world seems to be watching with suspicious eyes. The next afternoon hit differently. Marcus's feet dragged as he walked home from school, his backpack heavy with homework he'd need to complete between jobs. The math test results wouldn't come until Monday, and his mother's pain medication was running low. The pharmacy coterie loomed in his mind, a steady drum of worry beating against his temples. He turned onto Oak Street, taking his usual shortcut through the neighborhood where the bigger houses stood. That's when he saw him, an elderly man in a beige sweater, standing motionless on the sidewalk. The man's white hair caught the late afternoon sun, and his hands gripped a wooden cane so tightly his knuckles showed white. Marcus slowed his pace. Something wasn't right. The old man kept turning his head from side to side, his movements jerky and uncertain, like a lost child looking for their parent in a crowded store. "Sir," Marcus called out softly, still keeping his distance. "Are you okay?" The old man's head snapped toward him, eyes wide and unfocused. I need to get home." His voice trembled. "But I can't remember." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd seen that lost look before, in his grandmother's eyes during her final months. But helping meant getting involved, and getting involved meant risk. His fingers unconsciously touched the spot on his arm where Mr. Crawford had grabbed him during the theft accusation. "Maybe I can help you find," Marcus started to say, but movement across the street caught his eye. A man in a dark suit stood watching them, his face unreadable in the shadow of a large oak tree. The old man shuffled his feet, his cane scraping against the concrete. "Elizabeth," he called out suddenly. "Elizabeth? Are you there?" "Sir, is Elizabeth someone we can call?" Marcus stepped closer, keeping his movements slow and visible. She always knows the way home." The old man's voice cracked. "But she's not here anymore. She's been gone for, I can't remember how long." A woman pushing a stroller approached them on the sidewalk. Marcus tried to catch her eye. "Excuse me, could you help us? This gentleman needs—" She crossed to the other side of the street without looking at them, her pace quickening. "Please," the old man whispered, more to himself than to Marcus. "I just want to go home." Marcus pulled out his phone. He could call the police. Let them handle this. That's what adults always said to do. Call the authorities. Don't get involved. Stay safe. But his finger hovered over the keypad as he remembered how the police had treated him during the Crawford incident. The man in the suit still hadn't moved. He stood perfectly still, watching their interaction with an intensity that made Marcus's skin prickle. "Sir, what's your name?" Marcus tried again, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Thompson. James Thompson." The old man blinked rapidly. I live. His face crumpled in frustration. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Thompson. The same name as the man on his paper route, the one with the son in the suit who never looked at him. But this couldn't be the same Mr. Thompson, could it? That house was at least 15 blocks from here. A car horn blared nearby, making Mr. Thompson jump. His cane slipped on the concrete, and Marcus lunged forward instinctively to steady him. The old man's hand gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Don't leave," Mr. Thompson pleaded. Everyone else walks away. The sun dipped lower in the sky. Marcus should have been at the corner store by now, checking the job board. His mother would worry if he was late. But Mr. Thompson's hand trembled against his arm, and the fear in the old man's eyes was too real to ignore. "I won't leave," Marcus said. "We'll figure this out together." He tried waving at passing cars, hoping someone would stop to help. One after another, they drove past. Some drivers stared straight ahead, pretending not to see. Others slowed down just enough to give them suspicious looks before speeding up again. The man in the suit had moved closer now, but still kept his distance. Marcus could see his face better, sharp features, expensive haircut, a Bluetooth device in his ear. He looked familiar somehow, but Marcus couldn't place him. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus said gently, "do you remember what your house looks like? Any special things about it?" The old man's forehead wrinkled in concentration. "Flowers. Elizabeth's flowers. Yellow ones, by the front door. And a church bell. I can hear it on Sundays." Marcus's heart beat faster. He did know a house like that. On his paper route, the one with the Thompson nameplate and the garden full of daffodils. The same house where the suit-wearing son lived. But 15 blocks was a long way to walk with someone in Mr. Thompson's condition. And if he was wrong, if it wasn't the same house. "You're just a boy," Mr. Thompson said suddenly, his voice clearing for a moment. "You shouldn't have to. I should be able to." His words trailed off, replaced by a look of such deep shame that Marcus felt his own eyes sting. "I'm stronger than I look," Marcus said, trying to smile. "And I know these streets pretty well. I deliver papers here." Mr. Thompson's grip on his arm loosened slightly. "Papers?" "Yes. We get the paper. Every morning, right there on the top step. Never fails. Another piece clicked into place. Marcus pulled out his phone again, this time opening his route map. He'd marked every house, every specific delivery instruction. Thompson, J. 1247, Maple Street. Top step, remove plastic wrap. Mr. Thompson, I think I might know where you live. Would you like to try walking there with me? We can take it slow. The old man nodded hesitantly. But what if it's not the right place? Then we'll try something else, Marcus assured him. I won't leave until we find your home. They began walking slowly, Marcus matching his pace to Mr. Thompson's uncertain steps. The man in the suit followed at a distance, his shoes clicking softly on the pavement. Marcus kept glancing back, trying to decide if he represented help or threat. The shadows grew longer as they walked. Marcus should have been home by now, should have been helping his mother with dinner and sorting through bills. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably her wondering where he was. But he couldn't check it now, couldn't risk Mr. Thompson feeling abandoned. Tell me about your paper route, Mr. Thompson said after they'd walked a block in silence. How long have you been doing it? Marcus recognized the attempt at conversation for what it was, Mr. Thompson trying to stay present, to keep his mind working. 6 months now. Started in the summer when we needed some extra money. Early mornings, Mr. Thompson nodded. I hear the papers being delivered. Sometimes I watch from the window when I can't sleep. Such a quiet time of day. They passed the corner store where Marcus usually checked for jobs. Through the window, he could see Mr. Johnson at the counter, probably wondering why Marcus hadn't shown up. Another opportunity slipping away. Mr. Thompson stumbled slightly, and Marcus tightened his grip. Careful, sir. Maybe we should rest for a minute. No. Keep going. If we stop. The fear crept back into his voice. If we stop, I might forget again. So they kept walking, past houses with warm lights coming on in windows, past cars pulling into driveways as people returned from work. The man in the suit maintained his distance, always there, always watching. You remind me of someone, Mr. Thompson said suddenly. A boy who used to visit. My grandson, I think. But he hasn't. His face clouded over again. Tell me about him, Marcus encouraged, hoping to keep Mr. Thompson talking. What's your grandson like? Smart boy. Good at mathematics. Mr. Thompson's steps became slightly more confident as he spoke. We used to work in the garden together. Before Elizabeth, before things changed. They turned onto Maple Street, and Marcus felt a surge of hope. The church spire was visible now, its bell tower rising above the trees. Just a few more blocks. But Mr. Thompson was tiring. His steps had become slower, more uncertain. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. We're almost there, Marcus assured him. See that church ahead? You mentioned hearing bells on Sunday. Mr. Thompson squinted into the distance. Yes, I think. But everything looks different now. The shadows. The sun had nearly set, painting the street in deep purples and blues. Marcus's phone buzzed again in his pocket. His mother must be really worried by now. Just a little further, he encouraged, though his own arms ached from supporting Mr. Thompson's weight. We're going to make it. The man in the suit had moved closer now, close enough that Marcus could hear his expensive shoes on the pavement, could smell his cologne on the evening air. But still he said nothing, did nothing to help. They passed house after house, Marcus checking numbers as they went. 1239, 1241, 1243. Mr. Thompson's steps faltered again. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry you have to. That I can't. Don't apologize, Marcus said firmly. We're helping each other, that's all. Look, yellow flowers, just like you said. They stopped in front of 1247 Maple Street. Daffodils lined the walkway, their heads nodding in the evening breeze. The paper Marcus had delivered that morning still sat on the top step, exactly where he'd left it. Mr. Thompson stared at the house, his face working through confusion to recognition. Yes, he breathed. Yes, I live here. This is home. The porch light clicked on suddenly, and the front door opened. A woman rushed out, her face tight with worry. Dad? Oh my God, Dad. She ran down the steps toward them. We've been looking everywhere for you. Behind them, the man in the suit finally spoke, his voice crisp and authoritative. It's all right, Sarah, I've been following them, making sure everything was okay. Marcus felt Mr. Thompson's hand tighten on his arm one last time before his daughter reached them. As the family reunion unfolded on the sidewalk, Marcus began to step back, to fade away as he'd learned to do so many times before. But Mr. Thompson's voice stopped him. "Wait," he called out, his voice stronger now. "The boy, he helped me. When no one else would, he helped me." The man in the suit stepped forward into the porch light, and Marcus finally recognized him, Mr. Thompson's son, the one who never looked at him during morning deliveries. But he was looking now, really looking, with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "Yes," the man said slowly. "Yes, he did." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "Young man, I believe we need to talk." Marcus stared at the business card in Mr. Thompson's son's hand. The porch light caught the gold lettering. William Thompson, Senior Investment Manager. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for it. "Dad, let's get you inside," Sarah said, gently taking her father's arm. "You must be exhausted." Mr. Thompson resisted slightly. "The boy, Marcus. His name is Marcus. He delivers our paper." William Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. "The paper boy? You're our paper boy?" "Yes, sir." Marcus slipped the business card into his pocket. Every morning, top step, plastic wrap removed, a police car turned onto Maple Street, lights flashing but siren silent. It pulled up to the curb, and two officers stepped out. Marcus felt his shoulders tense. "Everything all right here?" The first officer approached, hand resting casually on his belt. "We got a call about a missing person." "It's fine now, officers," William said smoothly. "We found my father. This young man helped him get home." The second officer looked Marcus up and down. "You're the Crawford kid, aren't you? The one from last month's incident?" "No, sir. I mean, I was involved, but I didn't." Marcus started to explain, but William cut him off. "This boy is my father's paper carrier, and today he went above and beyond his duties to help an elderly man in need." William's voice carried authority. "We won't be needing police assistance." The officers exchanged looks but nodded. As they returned to their car, Marcus heard his phone buzz again. His mother must be frantic by now. "I should go," he said quickly. "My mom's waiting, and it's getting late." "Of course," William nodded. "But about tomorrow," William, Sarah interrupted. "Dad needs to rest, and Marcus probably needs to get home. Whatever business you have can wait until morning." Mr. Thompson, who had been quiet during the police interaction, suddenly spoke up. "Marcus helped me. When everyone else walked by, he stopped. He listened." Marcus felt his face grow warm. "Anyone would have." "No," Mr. Thompson said firmly, a moment of complete clarity in his voice. "They didn't. You did." Sarah squeezed her father's arm. "And we're very grateful. But now everyone needs rest. Including you, young man." Marcus nodded and turned to go, but Mr. Thompson called out once more. "You'll come back? Promise you'll come back." The vulnerability in the old man's voice made Marcus's chest tight. "I'll be here in the morning, sir. With your paper, like always." As Marcus walked home in the growing darkness, his mind raced. His phone showed 6 missed calls from his mother. He dialed her number with shaking fingers. "Marcus? Baby, where are you?" Her voice carried panic and relief in equal measure. "I'm okay, Mom. I'm on my way home. I had to help someone." "Help someone?" "Marcus, you can't just disappear like that. I've been worried sick." "I know. I'm sorry. There was this older man, Mr. Thompson. He has Alzheimer's, I think, like Grandma did. He was lost, and nobody would help him. And, slow down, baby." His mother's voice softened. "Start from the beginning." So Marcus told her everything as he walked home, finding Mr. Thompson, the long walk, the suspicious onlookers, the man in the suit who turned out to be the son. By the time he finished, he was turning onto their street. "You did good, Marcus," his mother said quietly. "You did real good. But next time, please call me first." "I will. I'm almost home now." "Good. And Marcus, I'm proud of you." The house was dark when he arrived, but the porch light clicked on as he approached. His mother opened the door before he reached it, pulling him into a tight hug that made his tired muscles ache. "Let me look at you," she said, holding him at arm's length. "You look exhausted." "I'm okay." Marcus managed a small smile. "Just hungry." There's soup on the stove. Come on. Tell me more about this, Mr. Thompson, while you eat. In the kitchen, Marcus sat at their small table while his mother reheated soup. The business card felt heavy in his pocket, but he didn't mention it. Not yet. First, he needed to understand what it might mean. His daughter seemed nice, Marcus said between spoonfuls of soup. And his son? He's the one who never looked at me during deliveries. But today he did. His mother sat across from him, her work uniform wrinkled from a long day. Sometimes it takes something big to make people really see each other. Like with Grandma, when she got sick. Yeah, baby. Like that. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Finish your soup. You've got deliveries in the morning. Later, lying in bed, Marcus pulled out the business card again. The gold lettering caught the streetlight filtering through his window. William Thompson, Senior Investment Manager. The man who had watched from a distance while Marcus helped his father home. Morning came too soon. Marcus's alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m., same as always. His muscles protested as he pulled on his yellow sweatshirt, still aching from yesterday's long walk. His mother was already in the kitchen, but something was different. She sat at the table instead of standing at the counter, and no breakfast smells filled the air. Mom? You okay? Back's acting up again. She tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. I called Denny's, told them I need a day off. Marcus's heart sank. They couldn't afford a day off, not with the medical bills and rent coming due. I can skip the paper route, stay home with you. No, baby. Those papers need delivering, and we need the money. I'll be fine here with some rest. But, Marcus. Her voice was firm. Go do your route. We'll figure something out about the rest later. He made her tea before leaving, setting it on the table with her pain pills. The papers waited on the front step as usual, but today they felt heavier somehow. The pre-dawn streets were quiet as Marcus began his deliveries. Each house, each specific instruction helped create a rhythm. Top step, mailbox, front porch, repeat. But as he approached 1247 Maple Street, his steps slowed. The porch light was on. Mr. Thompson sat in a rocking chair, wrapped in a thick blanket despite the mild morning air. His daughter Sarah stood behind him, hands resting on the chair's back. Good morning, Marcus said softly, climbing the steps with the paper. You came back. Mr. Thompson smiled, his voice clearer than yesterday. Just like you promised. Every morning, sir. Sarah watched their interaction closely. Dad couldn't sleep. He wanted to wait for you. The paper helps, Mr. Thompson explained. Knowing what day it is, what's happening. Elizabeth and I used to do the crossword together every morning. Marcus held out the paper. But instead of taking it, Mr. Thompson patted the porch step beside his chair. Sit for a minute, if you have time. A glance at his phone showed 5:45 a.m. He was ahead of schedule, thanks to moving faster than usual through the first part of his route. A few minutes, Marcus agreed, settling onto the step. His tired legs thanked him for the rest. William, my son, he wants to talk to you, Mr. Thompson said. About a job? Sarah squeezed her father's shoulder. Dad, let William handle his own business. Marcus has a route to finish. No, it's okay, Marcus said quickly. What kind of job? The garden. Mr. Thompson gestured toward the daffodils. Elizabeth's garden. It needs. I can't. His words began to tangle again. What Dad means, Sarah stepped in, is that we could use some help maintaining the yard. William mentioned you do odd jobs in the neighborhood. Marcus nodded. Yes, lawn care, gutters, whatever needs doing. Well, if you're interested. William would like to discuss a regular arrangement. After school, maybe a few hours each afternoon. The possibility of steady work made Marcus's heart beat faster. Regular income meant predictable money for bills, for his mother's medication. I'd like that, he said carefully. But I'd need to talk to my mom first. Of course. Sarah smiled. Why don't you come by after school today? William will be home early. Mr. Thompson reached out suddenly, his hand finding Marcus's shoulder. You'll help with Elizabeth's flowers? They're all I have left of her sometimes. When the memories get foggy, I'll learn everything I can about taking care of them, Marcus promised. If I get the job. You already have the job, Mr. Thompson said firmly. You helped me when no one else would. Now let me help you. The sun began to rise, painting the street in soft gold light. Marcus stood reluctantly. I need to finish my route, but I'll come back after school. Promise? Mr. Thompson's voice carried that same vulnerability from yesterday. I promise, sir. Just like I promised about the paper. As Marcus continued his deliveries, his tired muscles didn't seem to ache quite as much. Behind him, he could hear Sarah gently encouraging her father to come inside, and Mr. Thompson's voice carrying on the morning air. He came back, just like he said he would. The rest of his route passed in a blur of motion and memory. Each paper delivered brought him closer to the end of his shift, to school, to the afternoon meeting that might change everything. But one thought kept circling in his mind. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places, and sometimes trust, once given, finds its way back to you in ways you never imagined. The final bell rang at 3:15 p.m. Marcus gathered his books slowly, his stomach tight with anticipation. The meeting with William Thompson loomed ahead, carrying both promise and pressure. Mr. Williams, Ms. Rodriguez called as he headed for the door. A moment. Marcus turned back, adjusting his backpack strap. Yes. She held up his math test from yesterday, a red A- marked at the top. Excellent work, especially given how tired you've been looking lately. Thank you. Marcus took the test, careful not to show how much his hands were shaking. I studied hard. I know you did. She paused, studying his face. Is everything okay at home? You seem distracted in class today. Yes, just maybe getting a new job after school. Kind of nervous about it. Ms. Rodriguez nodded but didn't push further. Well, keep up the good work. And Marcus, if you ever need to talk. I know. Thanks, Ms. Rodriguez. The hallway had nearly emptied by the time he left the classroom. Marcus walked quickly to his locker, exchanging textbooks for the ones he'd need for homework. The test paper went carefully into his folder. His mother would want to see it. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on the playground. Marcus checked his phone. 3:25 p.m. He had 35 minutes to walk to the Thompson house for his 4 o'clock meeting. As he turned onto Maple Street, movement caught his eye. Mr. Thompson stood on his front lawn, still wearing his morning robe, turning in slow circles. Marcus broke into a run. Mr. Thompson? Are you okay? The old man spun toward his voice, relief flooding his features. Marcus, I was looking for... Something's wrong with the flowers. Sarah burst out of the front door. Dad, you can't just wander out like that. She reached them, slightly out of breath. Marcus, I'm sorry. He's been agitated all day, asking about the garden. Elizabeth always knew which flowers needed what, Mr. Thompson said, his fingers worrying the belt of his robe. But I can't remember. Marcus set his backpack down carefully. Would you like to show me the garden, sir? Maybe we can figure it out together. Sarah shot him a grateful look. William's running late anyway. Traffic problem downtown. Would you mind? Of course not. Marcus gestured to a wooden bench near the flower bed. Should we sit, Mr. Thompson? You can tell me about the flowers. The old man moved to the bench, his steps steadier than yesterday but still uncertain. Elizabeth had a system. Everything had its place, its purpose. Marcus sat beside him, keeping a respectful distance. The flower bed stretched before them, a mix of daffodils, tulips, and other plants Marcus couldn't name. Tell me about Elizabeth's system, he encouraged. Maybe if you talk about it, it'll help you remember. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, pointing with a shaking finger. The yellow ones, daffodils, they were her favorite. She planted them in groups of 3. Said they were happier that way, like a little family. Sarah remained on the porch, watching but giving them space. A delivery truck rumbled past on the street, and Mr. Thompson flinched at the noise. What about these purple ones? Marcus asked quickly, trying to keep him focused. Iris? No. Wait. That's not right. Mr. Thompson's face creased with frustration. They bloom later. These are crocuses, Sarah called softly from the porch. Mom planted those every fall. Yes, crocuses. Mr. Thompson smiled briefly before his face fell again. But they need something. Care. Elizabeth would know. Marcus studied the flowers. The soil around them looked dry, with small weeds beginning to sprout between the blooms. Maybe they are thirsty and need some weeding. Yes. Mr. Thompson straightened slightly. Yes, she always said weeds were like unwanted guests. Had to show them out politely but firmly. Would you like to help me clean up this bed a little? While we wait for your son. The old man's eyes brightened. You do that? Even before the job is official? Sure. Marcus stood and rolled up his sleeves. Where do you keep your gardening tools? Garage, Sarah said. I'll show you. The garage smelled of oil and old wood. Sarah led Marcus to a wall of neatly organized tools. Mom's gardening stuff is here. Dad used to help her. Before. She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. Anyway, the weeding tools are on this shelf. Marcus selected a small hand trowel and what looked like a miniature rake. These okay to use? Perfect. Sarah grabbed a pair of gloves. And Marcus? Thank you for being so patient with him. He reminds me of my grandmother. Before she passed, Marcus tested the trowel's weight in his hand. Sometimes she'd get confused too. But she always knew her cooking recipes, right up until the end. Back outside, Mr. Thompson had moved to stand near the flower bed. His robe fluttered in the afternoon breeze as he pointed to different spots. The weeds, they are hiding. Sneaky things. We'll find them, Marcus assured him. He knelt by the flowers and began gently loosening the soil around the weeds. For the next 20 minutes, they worked together. Marcus pulled weeds while Mr. Thompson directed him, his memory of the garden seeming to strengthen as they went. He knew which plants were delicate, which needed space to grow, which ones Elizabeth had babied through tough seasons. She talked to them, Mr. Thompson said softly, watching Marcus work. Every morning, she'd come out here and say good morning to each type of flower. Said they grew better with conversation. Sarah brought out a pitcher of water and began carefully moistening the soil around the plants. The three of them fell into a rhythm, Marcus weeding, Mr. Thompson supervising, Sarah watering. A sleek black car pulled into the driveway at 4:15. William Thompson stepped out, his suit perfectly pressed despite the late summer heat. He stopped short at the sight of them working in the garden. Dad, what are you doing out here? Helping Marcus, Mr. Thompson said proudly. He knows about the weeds. Just like Elizabeth taught me. William's expression softened slightly. I see. He turned to Marcus. I apologize for being late. Traffic was terrible. It's okay, sir. Marcus stood, brushing dirt from his knees. Mr. Thompson was teaching me about the garden. Yes, well? William straightened his tie. Shall we discuss business? Inside. Sarah touched her father's arm. Dad, why don't we get you cleaned up? You can change into regular clothes while William talks to Marcus. Mr. Thompson's face clouded. But the flowers will still be here after, Marcus promised. Maybe we can check on them again before I leave. The old man nodded slowly. You'll come back? Yes, sir. Just going inside for a little while. Sarah led her father toward the house while William gestured for Marcus to follow him to a small home office. The room smelled of leather and coffee, with diplomas and certificates covering one wall. Sit, please. William indicated a chair before settling behind a large desk. Marcus perched on the edge of the seat, suddenly very aware of his dirt-stained hands and worn clothes. So, William began, I understand you do odd jobs around the neighborhood. Yes, sir. Yard work mostly. Some cleaning and maintenance. And you deliver our paper? Yes, sir. 6 months now. William leaned back in his chair. What you did yesterday, helping my father, that was significant. Not many people would have taken the time. He needed help, Marcus said simply. Like my grandmother did, when she was sick. Oh. William's expression changed slightly. You have experience with memory issues. Some. My grandmother had Alzheimer's. Passed away last year. I'm sorry to hear that. William was quiet for a moment. Look, Marcus, here's what I'm proposing. Regular work, 3 hours after school, Monday through Friday. Basic yard maintenance, some light cleaning, but mostly just being here. With my father. Marcus's heart beat faster. Being here. Dad seems to trust you. Respond to you. Sarah can't be here all the time, and our regular caregiver just quit. We need someone who can keep an eye on things. Make sure he doesn't wander off again. Like yesterday. William pulled out a folder. I'm prepared to offer $15 an hour, plus bonuses for additional tasks as needed. We'll provide all necessary tools and equipment. Marcus did the math quickly in his head. $4 to $5 a day, over $200 a week. More than he made from all his other odd jobs combined. I'd need to talk to my mom, he said carefully. And make sure it doesn't interfere with school. Of course. William wrote something on a piece of paper. Here's the formal offer, with details about duties and payment. Have your mother call me if she has any questions. A sound from the doorway made them both look up. Mr. Thompson stood there, now dressed in slacks and a sweater, Sarah hovering behind him. The flowers, he said urgently. Marcus needs to see the rest of the flowers. William started to object, but Marcus stood quickly. I'd like that, Mr. Thompson. If it's okay with your son. We're finished here. William nodded. Take the offer home, discuss it with your mother. Let me know by tomorrow. Back in the garden, Mr. Thompson moved with more confidence. He pointed out different flowers, occasionally mixing up names but always certain of their care requirements. Marcus listened carefully, making mental notes. Elizabeth would like you, Mr. Thompson said suddenly. She always said gardens need young hands and old knowledge to thrive. The sun had started to set by the time Marcus gathered his backpack to leave. The offer letter felt heavy in his pocket, full of possibility and responsibility. You'll come back tomorrow? Mr. Thompson asked, same as he had that morning. Yes, sir. Marcus smiled. With your paper. And maybe after school too. Good. The flowers need you. Like they needed Elizabeth. As Marcus walked home in the gathering dusk, his mind raced with possibilities. The job would mean steady income, a chance to help his mother without scrambling for random work. But it also meant responsibility, not just for a garden, but for a man whose memories sometimes slipped away like water through cupped hands. His own hands still smelled of earth and flowers, and somehow, that felt right. Like his grandmother used to say, sometimes the best way to help yourself is to help others first. Marcus just hoped his mother would see it the same way. Marcus found his mother sitting at their kitchen table, medical bills spread out before her. Her work uniform hung on the back of her chair, ready for tomorrow's shift. How'd the meeting go? She asked, pushing the papers aside. Marcus pulled out the offer letter and his math test. Got these today. His mother reached for the test first, a smile breaking across her tired face. A minus. Baby, that's wonderful. And this? He handed her the offer letter. Mr. Thompson's son wants to hire me. After school, every day. She read the letter slowly, her lips moving slightly. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. $15 an hour? Plus bonuses. Marcus sat across from her. 3 hours every afternoon. I can still do my paper route in the morning, and there's time for homework after dinner. This is... She looked at the letter again. This is real? They are serious. Yes. Mr. Thompson is like Grandma was. Gets confused sometimes. They need someone to help with the garden and just be there. Make sure he's okay. His mother's hand found his across the table. Like you did with Grandma. Yeah. Marcus squeezed her fingers. Mom, this could help with the bills. With your medication. But what about school? Your grades? Marcus held up the math test. I'm keeping them up. Promise. And Mr. Thompson, he reminds me of Grandma. When he talks about his wife Elizabeth in the garden, it's like how Grandma was with her cooking. His mother was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. You really want to do this? Yes. I think I need to. She nodded slowly. Okay. But first sign of your grades dropping. I know. School comes first. Marcus stood and hugged her. Thank you, Mom. Don't thank me yet. I'm still calling Mr. Thompson tomorrow to discuss details. Morning came with a gentle rain. Marcus delivered papers in his yellow raincoat, the newspapers wrapped carefully in plastic. When he reached the Thompson house, the porch was empty, but the kitchen light glowed warmly. School passed in a blur of anticipation. Even Tommy Peterson's usual taunts couldn't dampen Marcus's mood. By the time the final bell rang, the rain had stopped, leaving the world fresh and clean. Sarah answered the door when Marcus arrived at the Thompson house. Dad's been asking for you all day. He's in the sunroom. The sunroom faced the garden, its windows streaming with water droplets. Mr. Thompson sat in a comfortable chair, a photo album open on his lap. Marcus. He looked up with a smile. Come see. Elizabeth's flowers. Through the years. Marcus set his backpack down and pulled up a chair. The album pages held carefully preserved photographs, each labeled in neat handwriting. Spring, 1985, Mr. Thompson pointed. Our first garden together. Elizabeth wanted daffodils everywhere. Said they were like little bits of sunshine. The photos showed a younger Mr. Thompson and a woman with kind eyes, both kneeling in freshly turned earth. Their smiles were bright, their hands dirty with soil. "You took good care of the garden together," Marcus said. Yes, we did." Mr. Thompson turned a page. "Until I started forgetting." His voice caught. "Now I can't even remember which flowers need shade and which need sun." "That's okay." Marcus touched the photo gently. "We can learn together. And the flowers, they are still growing. Still beautiful." Mr. Thompson's hand trembled as he turned another page. "William used to help too, when he was young. Before he got busy with important things." A new photo showed a boy about Marcus's age, wearing a private school uniform, helping his mother plant bulbs. The boy's smile looked forced, his posture stiff. "Your son seems like a good man," Marcus said carefully. "He wants to make sure you're taken care of." "He is. Good at business. Good at arranging things." Mr. Thompson's voice turned bitter. "Arranges everything now. My medicine, my food, my life." Steps in the hallway made them both look up. William stood in the doorway, his suit jacket draped over one arm. "Dad, it's time for your medication." Mr. Thompson's shoulders stiffened. "I'm showing Marcus the garden pictures. Elizabeth's pictures." "I know, Dad. But the doctor said regular timing is important." William turned to Marcus. "Could you give us a minute?" Marcus stood, but Mr. Thompson grabbed his wrist. "Stay, please. I don't like the pills. They make everything foggy." "Dad." William's voice held frustration and something else. "Pain, maybe. We've talked about this. The medication helps you manage me." "You mean?" Mr. Thompson's grip tightened on Marcus's wrist. "Like you managed Elizabeth at the end, putting her in that place. It was a care facility, Dad. The best in the state. I couldn't." William's professional facade cracked slightly. "I couldn't take care of both of you alone." Marcus stood frozen between them, feeling the weight of years of hurt and misunderstanding. He thought of his own father, who had left without even trying to manage anything. "Sir," he said quietly to Mr. Thompson, maybe we could take the medicine, then finish looking at the pictures? I'd really like to learn more about the garden." Mr. Thompson's grip loosened. "You'll stay. Promise. Just like always." William handed his father the pills and a glass of water with slightly shaking hands. Mr. Thompson swallowed them without further argument, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "Thank you," William said softly as he left the room. Sometimes it's harder for him to refuse when it's not family." Marcus finished. William's face tightened. "Yes. Well, carry on with the photos. I'll be in my office if needed." They spent the next hour going through the album. Mr. Thompson's words began to slur slightly as the medication took effect, but his memories of the garden remained clear. He pointed out different flowers, explaining Elizabeth's methods for planting and care. She believed in companion planting, he said, showing a photo of marigolds bordering vegetable beds. Said flowers look after each other, like people should. Sarah brought them lemonade and cookies, hovering in the doorway with a worried expression. "How's he doing?" she whispered to Marcus as her father dozed briefly over the album. "Good, I think. Telling me about Mrs. Thompson's gardening techniques." "Mom," Sarah corrected gently. "You can call her Mom." Everyone did. Mr. Thompson stirred. "Sarah? Your mother. She wanted to show you something. In the garden. It's Marcus, Dad. Remember? We're looking at pictures." No. Sarah was just here." His face clouded with confusion. "I am here, Dad." Sarah knelt beside his chair. "And Marcus is helping us with the garden now. Remember?" Mr. Thompson blinked slowly. "Marcus?" "Yes. The paper boy. He helped me get home." "That's right." Marcus smiled encouragingly. "And you're teaching me about the flowers. Elizabeth's flowers." Mr. Thompson's voice strengthened. "She would have liked you. Always said we needed more young people in the garden." Sarah wiped her eyes quickly. "Dad, it's almost dinner time. Why don't you rest while I fix your plate?" "But Marcus." "We'll be back tomorrow," Marcus assured him. "We can look at more pictures then." As Sarah helped her father to the dining room, William appeared in the doorway. "A word, Marcus." In the office, William seemed to struggle with what to say. Finally, he pulled out a checkbook. "This first week, consider it a bonus. For today, with the medication." "No, sir." Marcus stepped back. I don't want extra money for that. But you handled it so well. Got him to take the pills without a fight. Because he trusts me. Marcus met William's eyes. And I won't. I can't take money for that trust. William slowly put the checkbook away. You're an unusual young man, Marcus. No, sir. I know what it's like. When someone you love starts slipping away. Marcus picked up his backpack. My grandmother, she hated taking her medicine too. Said it stole her memories faster than the disease. How did you handle it? We made it part of her cooking routine. She'd take her pills while telling me recipes. Said they went down easier with a side of stories. William was quiet for a moment. Perhaps we could try something similar. With the garden photos. Maybe. Marcus headed for the door. See you tomorrow, sir. Marcus. William called after him. Thank you. For understanding. Outside, the setting sun painted the wet garden in gold. Marcus paused to look at the flowers, trying to remember all the names Mr. Thompson had taught him. Daffodils in groups of 3. Crocuses for early spring. Marigolds to protect the vegetables. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Dinner's ready. Proud of you. Marcus took one last look at the garden before heading home. Tomorrow he'd bring his notebook, start writing down Elizabeth's gardening wisdom while Mr. Thompson could still remember it. Some things were too precious to let slip away, even if you could only save them one memory at a time. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Marcus pulled his yellow sweatshirt tight against the chill as he made his first delivery. His breath formed small clouds in the pre-dawn air, and frost crunched under his feet. When he reached the Thompson house, he found Mr. Thompson already on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket. Sarah stood behind him, her face tight with worry. Couldn't sleep again? Marcus asked, climbing the steps with the paper. The cold reminds me, Mr. Thompson said, his voice clearer than usual in the crisp morning. Elizabeth loved frost on the flowers. Said it made them look like they were wearing diamond necklaces. Sarah touched her father's shoulder. Dad, it's too cold out here. Let's go inside. Just a few more minutes. Mr. Thompson reached for the paper Marcus held. Tell me, boy, what day is it? Sometimes I lose track. Friday, sir. October 15th. Friday. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. Elizabeth died on a Friday. First frost of the year. Just like today. Sarah's hand tightened on her father's shoulder. Dad, please. Come inside. The daffodils were still blooming. Mr. Thompson continued as if he hadn't heard her. Late bloomers, that last batch. She was so proud of them. Marcus stood quietly, watching frost melt on the porch railing. Some memories, he knew, needed to come out in their own time. William put her in that place. Mr. Thompson's voice turned hard. Said we couldn't manage anymore. Said it was for the best. It was for the best. Dad, Sarah said softly. We tried to care for her here. Remember? But after you got sick too. Sick? Mr. Thompson looked up at his daughter. I'm not sick. Just forgetful sometimes. Marcus saw tears in Sarah's eyes. Sir, he said quickly. Would you like to check the flowers before I head to school? Make sure the frost hasn't hurt them. The diversion worked. Mr. Thompson's face brightened slightly. Yes, we should check. Elizabeth would want us to check. They made their way carefully down the porch steps, Sarah hovering close to her father. The garden sparkled with frost, each flower wearing a delicate coating of white. See? Mr. Thompson pointed with a shaking hand. Diamonds, just like she said. Marcus pulled out his notebook. He'd started carrying one to write down gardening tips. What do we do for the flowers when it frosts, sir? Cover the tender ones. Mr. Thompson moved with more confidence now, pointing to different plants. The mums are hardy, they can take it. But the late bloomers need protection. Elizabeth always used old sheets. I'll bring some out after school, Marcus promised. We can cover them together. Sarah touched his arm as Mr. Thompson bent to examine a frost-covered bloom. Thank you, she whispered. These anniversary days, they are harder than most. The screen door slapped, and William emerged onto the porch, already dressed for work. Dad, what are you doing out in the cold? Showing Marcus about frost protection, Mr. Thompson said, not looking up. Like Elizabeth taught me. William's face softened slightly. I remember. Mom used to have us all out here with sheets and blankets, like we were tucking the flowers into bed. You never liked it, Mr. Thompson said sharply. Always complained about missing your morning cartoons. I was a kid, Dad. William straightened his tie. I didn't understand then how important it was. And now? Mr. Thompson turned to face his son. Do you understand now? Why she loved this garden? Why I need to stay here? With her flowers. The morning quiet stretched between them. Marcus looked at his phone. He needed to leave for school soon, but this moment felt too important to interrupt. I understand that you miss her, William finally said. We all do. But we have to keep going. Take care of what's left. What's left? Mr. Thompson's voice cracked. What's left is right here. Her garden, her memories. But you're so busy arranging everything, managing everything. You don't see it. Sarah stepped forward. Dad, William's just trying to help. We all are. Help? By treating me like I'm. Mr. Thompson's words tangled, his morning clarity beginning to slip. Like I can't take care of myself? Sir, Marcus said quietly, the frost is melting. We should get those sheets before the sun gets too high. Mr. Thompson blinked, his anger seeming to drain away. Yes, the flowers need covering. Elizabeth would want. I'll get the sheets from the garage, Sarah said quickly. Marcus needs to get to school. You're leaving. Mr. Thompson turned to Marcus, sudden fear in his voice. Just for school, sir. I'll be back this afternoon to help with the flowers. Remember? It's my job now. Job? Yes. William arranged it. Mr. Thompson glanced at his son. One thing he arranged that makes sense. William checked his watch. I need to go. Early meeting downtown. He hesitated, then added, Dad? I miss her too. Mr. Thompson didn't respond, his attention back on the frost-covered flowers. William sighed and headed for his car, his shoulders tight under his expensive suit. Marcus, Sarah called softly from the garage. Could you help me find the sheets before you go? Dad reorganized in here last week, and now I can't. Marcus followed her into the garage. Sarah stood among boxes and gardening tools, tears finally spilling over. I don't know where anything is anymore, she whispered. He moves things, forgets where he put them, gets angry when we can't find them. Like the sheets? Marcus started opening boxes. Like everything. Sarah wiped her eyes. Some days is so clear, so much like his old self. Other days. Found them. Marcus pulled old bedsheets from a box labeled summer clothes. Should I help you cover the flowers before I go? Sarah shook her head. You'll be late for school. I can manage. It's harder on days like today, when he remembers Mom so clearly but can't quite hold on to the present. My grandmother was the same way. Marcus handed her the sheets. Near the end, she could remember recipes from 50 years ago but couldn't remember what she'd had for breakfast. How did you handle it? We wrote everything down. All the recipes, all the stories. So even when she couldn't remember them anymore, we still had them. Sarah looked at the notebook peeking from Marcus's pocket. Is that what you're doing? With Dad's gardening knowledge? Yes. Figure somebody should keep track of Elizabeth's methods. Fresh tears filled Sarah's eyes. Thank you. For understanding. For helping. For. Marcus. Mr. Thompson's voice carried from the garden. The frost is melting. Elizabeth's flowers. Coming, Dad. Sarah called back. She squeezed Marcus's arm. Go on to school. We'll see you this afternoon. Marcus hurried down the driveway, his backpack heavy with books and his notebook full of gardening wisdom. Behind him, he heard Mr. Thompson beginning to explain to Sarah about frost protection, his voice carrying the same patient tone Elizabeth must have used when teaching him years ago. The school day passed slowly. Marcus took notes in his classes, but his mind kept drifting to the Thompson garden, to the frost-covered flowers and the family trying so hard to hold on to what remained of their memories. During lunch, he wrote down everything Mr. Thompson had told him about frost protection. The information might be useful later, on days when the old man's memory wasn't as clear as it had been this morning. After the final bell, Marcus hurried back to the Thompson house. The flowers had been carefully covered with sheets, making the garden look like it was full of small ghosts. Mr. Thompson sat in his usual spot on the porch, a fresh cup of tea in his hands. Marcus, you came back. Like always, sir. Marcus climbed the steps. The flowers look well protected. Yes, Sarah helped, though I can't quite remember. Mr. Thompson's face clouded. Was that today? Or was it when Elizabeth? Today, sir. This morning, we talked about frost protection. Remember how Elizabeth said the frost made the flowers look like they were wearing diamonds? Diamonds? Yes. Mr. Thompson's face cleared slightly. She loved morning frost. Said it was nature's way of jewelry. Marcus sat on the porch step, pulling out his notebook. Would you tell me more about what Elizabeth taught you? About protecting the garden in cold weather? For the next hour, Mr. Thompson talked while Marcus wrote. Sometimes the memories came clear and detailed. Other times they tangled and jumped between years. But Marcus wrote it all down, every tip, every memory, every bit of garden wisdom Elizabeth had left behind. As the sun began to set, Sarah brought out more tea and William's car pulled into the driveway. The family gathered on the porch, listening to Mr. Thompson's stories about Elizabeth and her beloved garden. She would have liked this, Mr. Thompson said suddenly, looking around at them all. Everyone together, taking care of her flowers. William loosened his tie. Yes, Dad, I think she would have. The sheets in the garden glowed gold in the sunset. And for a moment, they did look like something magical, like memories made visible, protecting what remained of Elizabeth's love against the cold. Saturday morning came with a heavy fog. Marcus finished his paper route early, the streets quiet and empty in the gray light. His muscles ached from yesterday's garden work, but it was a good kind of tired. He found his mother at the kitchen table, her work uniform already on. Early shift today, he asked, setting his delivery bag by the door. Double shift. She smiled tiredly. But guess what came in the mail yesterday? Marcus sat down as she pushed an envelope across the table. Inside was a check from the Thompsons, his first week's pay, plus a note from William. Thank you for everything. Bonus included for garden preparation. That's more than we talked about, Marcus said, staring at the amount. I called Mr. Thompson, William, yesterday while you were at school. He said you've been. She paused, wiping her eyes. He said you've been exactly what his father needed. A car horn sounded outside. Not the usual quick beep, but a dignified double tap. Marcus went to the window and froze. Mom, what is it? Baby. There's a limousine in front of our house. His mother joined him at the window. The black car gleamed in the morning fog, its driver standing at attention beside the rear door. Are you expecting? She started to ask, but a knock at their door interrupted her. Marcus opened it to find William Thompson on their step, wearing a casual sweater instead of his usual suit. Good morning, Marcus. Mrs. Williams. Mr. Thompson. Marcus's mother stepped forward. Is everything all right? Everything's fine. I was hoping we could take Marcus to breakfast. My father. He has something he'd like to discuss. Marcus looked at his mother. But Mom's got work. Actually, William said, we'd very much like for both of you to join us. Marcus's mother touched her uniform. I couldn't. I have a shift. I took the liberty of calling your manager at the diner, William said. Explained it was a family matter. They're holding your shift for tomorrow instead. The word family hung in the air between them. Marcus felt his mother's hand find his shoulder. Give us 5 minutes to change, she asked. Of course. We'll wait in the car. Once the door closed, Marcus's mother hurried to her room. Clean shirt, baby, and wash your face. 10 minutes later, they settled into the limousine's leather seats. Mr. Thompson sat inside, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt, Sarah beside him. Marcus. The old man's face lit up. And this must be your mother. Elizabeth would have loved you both. Dad's been talking about this all morning, Sarah explained as they pulled away from the curb. He has everything planned. Planned? Marcus asked. Mr. Thompson leaned forward eagerly. The garden needs more than just maintenance. It needs. He frowned, struggling for words. Vision, William supplied. Dad thinks the garden needs a new vision, and he wants Marcus to help create it. They pulled up to the city's finest breakfast restaurant. Marcus had passed it on his paper route but never imagined eating there. A doorman opened the car door, and they followed William inside. The maître d' led them to a private room where the table was already set with fine china and fresh flowers. Marcus's mother hesitated at the doorway. This is too much, she whispered. Nonsense, William said. Dad insisted. Once they were seated and had ordered, Mr. Thompson pulled out a folder. His hand shook slightly as he opened it. Elizabeth kept plans, he said, spreading papers on the table. For the garden. Different seasons, different years. But lately, I can't quite remember how it all fits together. The papers were covered with careful diagrams and notes in elegant handwriting. Planting schedules, flower bed layouts, color schemes for different seasons. These are beautiful, Marcus's mother said softly. Yes, Mr. Thompson smiled. Elizabeth was an artist with flowers. And now, he looked at Marcus. Now we need young hands to bring it back. To make it live again. William cleared his throat. What Dad's trying to say is, we'd like to offer Marcus a more permanent position. Not just maintenance, but actual garden design and implementation. But I don't know enough about, Marcus started. You know more than you think, Sarah interrupted. We've seen you taking notes, learning Dad's stories. Mom's methods. The position would include training, William added. Professional landscaping courses, if you're interested. And of course, Dad's guidance. When he remembers, Mr. Thompson said bitterly. When you remember, Marcus corrected gently, and I'll write everything down when you do. Like we've been doing. Their food arrived, plates of eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, pastries that made Marcus's mother's eyes widen. As they ate, William explained the details of the new offer. It would mean more hours, especially on weekends, but also better pay, and would cover any education costs. Of course, school comes first. We've already checked with your teachers about your grades. Marcus looked at his mother. She was watching him carefully, worry and pride warring on her face. It's a lot of responsibility, she said. Yes, William agreed. But Marcus has shown he can handle it. The way he helps Dad with his medication, the way he listens to the stories, writes everything down. The garden trusts him, Mr. Thompson said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. Elizabeth always said you could tell a true gardener by how the plants respond. And the flowers. They are brighter when Marcus is there. Sarah squeezed her father's hand. Dad's right. We've all seen it. The garden looks better than it has in years. But, William added, looking at Marcus's mother, we understand if it's too much. Marcus is young, and with your health issues. My health is improving, she said quietly. The new medication is helping. And Marcus? She touched her son's arm. Marcus has always been older than his years. Does that mean? Marcus asked. It means we need to see the actual offer. Review the details. Make sure it won't interfere with school. William pulled out another folder. Everything's here, including a healthcare provision for both of you. Marcus's mother's hand trembled as she took the folder. Healthcare. Full coverage, William confirmed. Dad insisted. Said Elizabeth would have wanted it. She would have, Mr. Thompson nodded. Would have said it's like mulch for people, provides protection, helps growth. Tears spilled down Marcus's mother's cheeks. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Mr. Thompson urged. The garden needs Marcus. And I need someone who understands. About Elizabeth. About remembering. Marcus looked at the garden plans spread across the table, at his mother wiping her eyes, at Mr. Thompson's hopeful face. Could I still do my paper route? William laughed. Dad would be devastated if you didn't. He waits for you every morning now. Then, Marcus met his mother's eyes, got her slight nod. Then yes, I'd be honored. Excellent. William signaled the waiter. I think this calls for celebration. Coffee for the adults, and hot chocolate for Marcus. As the drinks arrived, Mr. Thompson pulled one more item from his folder, a small, worn notebook with pressed flowers on the cover. Elizabeth's garden diary, he said, pushing it across the table to Marcus. Been looking for it for months. Found it last night, in my sock drawer of all places. He smiled sadly. Memory's funny that way. But I'd like you to have it. Study it. Learn from it. Marcus touched the notebook carefully. Are you sure? Elizabeth would want her knowledge passed on. To someone who cares about the garden like she did. The rest of breakfast passed in a blur of planning and stories. Mr. Thompson's memories flowed clearer than usual as he talked about Elizabeth's gardening principles. Marcus wrote everything down in his own notebook, while his mother and William discussed scheduling and educational opportunities. As they left the restaurant, the fog had lifted, revealing a bright autumn day. The limousine waited to take them all back to the Thompson house, where the garden sparkled with morning dew. Look, Mr. Thompson said as they pulled up to the house. The flowers are wearing diamonds again. Elizabeth's diamonds. Marcus helped him out of the car, supporting him up the front walk. The garden did seem to glow in the morning light, full of possibility and promise. Shall we check on everything? Marcus asked. Make sure the frost didn't do any damage. Yes, Mr. Thompson smiled. Yes, let's tend to Elizabeth's garden. Together. Behind them, William helped Marcus's mother out of the car, already talking about insurance forms and training schedules. Sarah walked ahead to open the garage and get the gardening tools. And Marcus realized that somehow, in helping Mr. Thompson remember his past, he'd found his own future. In a garden full of memories, where flowers wore diamonds in the morning frost, and stories bloomed as abundantly as Elizabeth's beloved daffodils. Monday morning dawned clear and cold. Marcus delivered his papers with extra care, knowing each house on his route a little better now. When he reached the Thompson house, both Mr. Thompson and William waited on the porch. Good morning, Marcus said, climbing the steps with their paper. First official day, William smiled, accepting the paper. Ready for this afternoon? Yes, sir. Marcus glanced at Mr. Thompson, who sat quietly in his rocking chair. Everything okay? Dad's just tired. Didn't sleep well last night. Mr. Thompson stirred slightly. The flowers need checking. After school, Marcus promised. We'll check everything together. School passed differently that day. During math, Ms. Rodriguez handed back another quiz, an A this time. She'd written at the top, "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." In English, they were reading about memory and identity. Marcus took extra notes, thinking about Mr. Thompson and how memories could slip away like water through cupped hands. Tommy Peterson tried to start trouble at lunch, making comments about Marcus being a charity case for the rich people on Maple Street. But the words didn't sting like they used to. Marcus just kept writing in his notebook, Elizabeth's garden tips from her diary, which he'd stayed up late studying. When the final bell rang, Marcus didn't head straight to the Thompson house. Instead, he stopped at the library and checked out 3 books on gardening and 1 on memory care. The librarian smiled as she stamped them. School project, she asked. No. Job training. Sarah answered the door when he arrived, her face relieved. Thank goodness you're here. Dad's been difficult today. Marcus followed her inside. Mr. Thompson sat in the sunroom, Elizabeth's garden diary open on his lap, but he was staring out the window with unfocused eyes. Who moved the roses? He demanded as they entered. Elizabeth had them by the fence. Who moved them? Sarah sighed. Dad, we haven't had roses there in years. Remember? After she got sick, you replaced them with daffodils. No, the roses were just there. Red ones. Elizabeth's favorites. Marcus set down his backpack and pulled out his notebook. Mr. Thompson, I was reading Elizabeth's diary last night. She wrote about the roses. The old man's head turned sharply. You have her diary. You gave it to me on Saturday. Remember? At breakfast? You said I should learn from it. I did. Mr. Thompson's hands trembled on the diary in his lap. Yes, I remember now. We had hot chocolate. That's right. Marcus opened his notebook. And look what I found. Elizabeth wrote about moving the roses in 1998. Said they weren't getting enough sun by the fence, so she replaced them with daffodils. She moved the roses to the south corner instead. Mr. Thompson's face cleared slightly. Yes, she did. The daffodils did better there. More sun. Sarah squeezed Marcus's shoulder as she left the room. Marcus sat down across from Mr. Thompson and pulled out the library books. I thought maybe we could study these together. Learn some new techniques to add to Elizabeth's methods. New techniques? Mr. Thompson frowned. But Elizabeth's ways were perfect, Marcus finished. But remember what you told me she used to say? That gardens need to grow and change, just like people do. A smile touched Mr. Thompson's lips. She did say that. Every spring, she'd try something new. Some experiment. So maybe we could do that too. Keep her methods but add some new ideas. Like. Marcus opened one of the books. Look at this section on companion planting. It's like what Elizabeth did with the marigolds, but with new combinations. For the next hour, they pored over the books together. Mr. Thompson's mood lifted as he recognized techniques similar to Elizabeth's, and he began suggesting modifications based on their garden-specific needs. William found them surrounded by books and notes, deep in discussion about soil pH levels. Dad, time for your medication. This time, Mr. Thompson took the pills without protest, not even pausing in his explanation about Elizabeth's composting methods. The garden looks like it needs attention, William said, glancing out the window. The weekend frost. We'll check it now, Marcus said, gathering his notes. Right, Mr. Thompson? Time to inspect Elizabeth's flowers. In the garden, the damage wasn't as bad as William had feared. Some of the more tender plants showed frostburn on their leaves, but the roots were solid. Elizabeth always said frost makes plants stronger, Mr. Thompson murmured, touching a damaged leaf. If they survive it. Marcus consulted Elizabeth's diary. She wrote that here, about hardening plants off gradually. Should we try that with these? They worked until sunset, Marcus taking notes as Mr. Thompson remembered more of Elizabeth's techniques. Sarah brought them water and watched from the porch, smiling at her father's renewed energy. The garden hasn't had this much attention since Mom, she told Marcus quietly as Mr. Thompson examined a bed of late-blooming asters. It's like part of him is waking up. The memories are still there, Marcus said. They just need help coming out sometimes. As they finished for the day, William came out to inspect their work. Looking good. Dad, how about we all have dinner together? Sarah's cooking. Mr. Thompson looked at Marcus. You'll join us? Oh, I should get home. Marcus started, but his phone buzzed with a text from his mother, working late. Left casserole in fridge. Please. Mr. Thompson asked. We can plan tomorrow's work. So Marcus stayed, calling his mother for permission first. Sarah's cooking filled the house with warm smells, and they ate in the formal dining room, surrounded by family photos. Mr. Thompson insisted Marcus sit beside him, showing him more pictures between bites. That's Elizabeth's first garden party. And there, William's graduation. Look at all the flowers she grew for it. After dinner, they returned to the sunroom with dessert. William loosened his tie and asked about their plans for the garden. Marcus found new companion planting techniques, Mr. Thompson said proudly. Like Elizabeth's, but different too. Good different. Change can be good, William agreed softly. As long as we remember what matters. When Marcus finally headed home, the night air had turned cold again. William insisted on driving him. Thank you, William said as they pulled up to Marcus's house. For today. For all of it. I just listened, Marcus shrugged. Like Elizabeth did. No. William's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You did more than listen. You gave him purpose again. Gave the garden purpose. Marcus gathered his books and notebooks. Elizabeth did that. I'm just helping him remember. His mother was home when he entered, looking tired but happy. Good day, she asked. Marcus showed her his notebooks, full of gardening wisdom both old and new. Showed her his quiz with the A, his library books, his plans for the garden. They feel like family, he admitted quietly. Is that weird? His mother hugged him tight. No, baby. That's not weird at all. Sometimes family is who you choose, or who chooses you. Later, in bed, Marcus reviewed his notes one more time. Elizabeth's garden diary sat on his nightstand, its pressed flowers still vibrant after all these years. Tomorrow would bring more memories, more stories, more chances to help Mr. Thompson remember. And maybe, Marcus thought as he drifted off to sleep, that's what gardens were really for, not just growing flowers, but growing connections. Between past and present, between memory and moment, between people who needed each other in ways they hadn't even known they needed. 2 months passed. Winter settled over the garden, but inside the Thompson house, things bloomed. Marcus arrived early one Saturday morning, not for paper delivery but for a special occasion. He carried his notebook, now full of garden plans and memories, and a small wrap package. Sarah opened the door before he could knock. Perfect timing. Dad's just finishing breakfast. The house smelled of coffee and cinnamon rolls. In the dining room, Mr. Thompson sat at the head of the table, wearing a new sweater. A small pile of presents sat before him. Marcus. His face lit up. You remembered? Of course. Marcus set his package with the others. Happy birthday, sir. William emerged from the kitchen, carrying more coffee. He'd started working from home more often, Marcus had noticed, taking lunch breaks in the garden with his father. 7 to 5, Mr. Thompson announced proudly. Elizabeth always made cinnamon rolls for birthdays. Still does, Sarah smiled, squeezing her father's shoulder. Through her recipe, Marcus had seen the recipe card, written in Elizabeth's elegant hand, now framed in the kitchen. Sarah had followed it exactly this morning, filling the house with memories. Present time? William asked, settling into his chair. Mr. Thompson reached for Marcus's package first. Inside, he found a leather-bound notebook, its cover embossed with a garden design. "Open it," Marcus encouraged. The first page held a pressed daffodil, one of Elizabeth's originals, carefully preserved. Below it, Marcus had written, "The Thompson Garden, a living history." "What?" Mr. Thompson's voice caught as he turned the pages. Marcus had spent weeks on it, working late into the nights. He'd transcribed every memory, every story, every gardening tip that Mr. Thompson had shared. He'd added Elizabeth's wisdom from her diary, and photos Sarah had helped him scan and print. "It's all there," Marcus explained. "Everything you've taught me. Everything Elizabeth taught you. So even on harder days, you can find the memories." Mr. Thompson's hands trembled as he touched the pressed flower. Elizabeth pressed flowers too. Said they were bookmarks in her memory. "I know." Marcus pointed to a passage he copied from her diary. "She wrote about it here. That's why I pressed this one, from her original daffodil bed." William leaned over to look at the book. "Dad, these are all your stories. About Mom, about the garden." "Not just stories," Mr. Thompson said firmly. "History. Our history." He looked at Marcus. "You wrote it all down. Every word." Sarah wiped her eyes. "Marcus has been working on it for weeks. Even interviewed the neighbors about Mom's garden parties." Mrs. Henderson remembered them. Marcus nodded. Said Elizabeth's spring tea parties were the highlight of the social season. "They were." Mr. Thompson smiled. She'd spend weeks planning the flower arrangements. Every table had its own color scheme. William cleared his throat. "Speaking of garden parties, Sarah and I have been talking. With spring coming, we thought we might revive the tradition," Sarah finished. "Not exactly like Mom's. Times have changed. But something new, honoring the old ways." Mr. Thompson looked out the window at the Winterberry garden. "But the flowers will be ready," Marcus assured him. "Remember the plans we made? The bulbs we planted in fall? Elizabeth's diary said they'll bloom just in time." They'd spent hours on those plans, combining Elizabeth's traditional designs with new ideas from Marcus's library books. Mr. Thompson had remembered more with each session, his stories flowing stronger as they worked. "And look at this," William pulled out an envelope. An early birthday present from the Garden Society. Inside was an invitation. The local horticultural club wanted to feature the Thompson Garden in their spring tour. "They've heard about the restoration work," William explained. "About how we're combining Mom's methods with new techniques. They're calling it a perfect blend of tradition and innovation." Mr. Thompson's eyes filled with tears. Elizabeth would have loved that. She always said gardens should grow with the times. Like she wrote here. Marcus turned to a page in the birthday book. October 1992. "Gardens are like people. They need roots to stay strong, but room to grow in new directions." Sarah brought out more coffee and served the cinnamon rolls. They ate while Mr. Thompson paged through his memory book, each entry sparking new stories. "Remember when you first came to help me, Marcus?" he asked suddenly. "When I was lost?" "Yes, sir. About 2 months ago now. I wasn't just lost on the street." Mr. Thompson touched the pressed daffodil gently. "I was lost here." He tapped his temple. Everything was foggy. "Slipping away." "Dad," Sarah started, but he held up his hand. "No, let me finish. The memories, they are still foggy sometimes. Still slip. But now." He lifted the book. "Now we have this. And the garden. And Marcus, who writes everything down, who listens, who helps us remember Mom," William said quietly. Mr. Thompson nodded. Elizabeth would say it's like her companion planting. Different elements supporting each other, helping each other grow. Marcus thought of his own growth these past months. His grades had improved even more. Ms. Rodriguez said he might qualify for advanced math next year. His mother's health had stabilized with the new insurance coverage. "And here, in this house, with these people, family," he said aloud. "Like companion planting, but with people." "Exactly." Mr. Thompson beamed. Elizabeth always said family was like her garden. Always room to grow more love. They spent the rest of the morning going through the other presents, new gardening tools, warm gloves for winter work, books on advanced horticulture. But Mr. Thompson kept returning to Marcus's memory book. "We'll add to it," Marcus promised. "Keep writing down the stories as they come. And make new ones," Sarah added. "With the garden parties, the tours, the future." William nodded. while honoring the past. After the birthday lunch, Marcus and Mr. Thompson bundled up and went to check the garden. The winter soil lay dormant under its protective mulch, but they knew what waited beneath. Thousands of bulbs, planted with care, carrying Elizabeth's legacy toward spring. She'd be proud, Mr. Thompson said, surveying their work. Not just of the garden, but of us, of how we've grown. Marcus thought of the day 2 months ago, when he'd found a confused old man on the street. Thought of all the moments since, morning papers and afternoon gardening, stories shared and memories preserved, a family healing and growing in unexpected ways. The flowers will be beautiful in spring, he said. Yes, Mr. Thompson smiled, and we'll be here to see them bloom. Together. Later, as Marcus walked home in the winter twilight, he carried more than his notebook and birthday cake. He carried the weight of stories, the lightness of belonging, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest gardens grow not in soil, but in the spaces between people's hearts. His mother waited up for him, despite working a late shift. How was the party? Marcus showed her the garden plans for spring, told her about the upcoming tours and parties, told her how Mr. Thompson had cried over the memory book, how William had started taking lunch breaks with his father, how Sarah was learning Elizabeth's recipes. Sounds like healing, his mother said softly. For everyone. Yeah. Marcus touched his notebook, full of memories old and new. Like Elizabeth wrote, gardens need roots to stay strong, but room to grow in new directions. Outside, the winter night deepened. But in Marcus's mind, he could already see spring. Daffodils blooming in groups of 3, Elizabeth's roses reaching for the sun, new flowers mingling with old favorites. And moving through it all, a family, not bound by blood but by something just as strong. The tender cultivation of memory, hope, and love, growing together in a garden where every flower told a story. Mr. Thompson would be waiting in the morning, ready for his paper, ready for another day of remembering and growing, of tending both flowers and connections. And Marcus would be there, notebook ready, helping to preserve each memory, each moment, like pressed flowers between pages, delicate, precious, and lasting.